My brother forced a DNA test to cut me out of my dad's will, but when the lawyer opened the envelope, he didn't look at me. He looked at him. I spent 18 years being told I didn't belong. My stepmother Diane would stare at me across the dinner table, sterling silver forks on bone china, everything perfect, everything calculated, and say just loud enough for Dad to hear, "It's strange, William. He looks nothing like you." My brother Preston would laugh, that sharp bark that made my shoulders tense. "Maybe he's not even really your son. Maybe Mom had a thing with the mailman. My real mother died when I was 3. Cancer. I don't remember her face, just the smell of her perfume, something floral and soft that disappeared the day Diane moved into our house. For 18 years I believed them. So when Dad died last month and Preston stood up at the will reading demanding I take a DNA test to prove I deserved any part of the estate, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was what happened when the lawyer opened the envelope. He didn't look at me. He looked at Preston. "My name is Ethan Carmichael. I'm 34 years old, senior financial analyst at Morrison & Clark in Boston. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Beacon Hill, drive a 7-year-old Subaru, and haven't spoken to anyone in my father's house since I was 17. That's when I left. Senior year of high school. Packed a duffel bag at 2 a.m., walked out the front door of the Carmichael estate, and never looked back. I found out Dad died through an email, not a phone call, not even a text. An email from his attorney, Lawrence Rothstein, saying William Carmichael had passed away from a stroke on November 8th, and my presence was required at the reading of his will. The email was formal, cold, like I was a business associate, not his son. I stared at it for 3 hours before I replied. The Carmichael estate sat on 12 acres in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Georgian brick, white columns, circular driveway with a fountain in the center. The kind of house that appeared in magazines under headlines like New England Elegance. I pulled up in my Subaru, rust spots on the bumper, a crack in the windshield, and felt like I was driving a bicycle to a Bentley convention. Diane stood at the front window, not grief on her face, anxiety, like she was bracing for impact. The house was full of relatives I barely recognized. Second cousins, business partners, people who whispered when I walked past. Only here for the money. 17 years, not one visit. Some son. Preston stood at the center of the room wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Hair perfectly styled, Rolex on his wrist, the golden child in every way that mattered to this family. He saw me and smiled, not friendly, victorious. "Ethan," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Glad you could make it." I nodded, didn't shake his hand. Lawrence Rothstein appeared in the doorway, mid-60s, wire-rimmed glasses, 37 years practicing estate law according to the plaque in his office. "Everyone, please, the library." We filed in, the library where Dad used to read to me when I was young, before Diane, before Preston, before everything turned cold. I took a seat in the back. Preston and Diane sat front row, center, like they were attending a Broadway show. Lawrence cleared his throat. "Before we begin, there's a matter that must be addressed." Preston stood. "Actually, Lawrence, I have something to say first." He turned to face the room, 32 people staring back. "My father's will states that his estate will be divided among his biological children, but," he looked directly at me, "there's been speculation for years about whether Ethan is actually Dad's son." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I think, in the interest of fairness and legal clarity, Ethan should take a DNA test to prove he's biologically related to William Carmichael." The room erupted, voices overlapping, some supportive, some outraged. "That's ridiculous." "Actually, that's reasonable. This is about money, not family." Diane stood beside Preston. "I hate to say this, but I've always had doubts. William's first wife, she had a complicated past. It's only responsible to verify." My hands clenched the armrests of my chair. Every eye in the room was on me. "Fine," I said quietly. The room went silent. "I'll take the test." I stood. "But the will says biological children. To be completely fair, shouldn't everyone claiming inheritance be tested?" Preston laughed. "Fine by me. I've got nothing to hide." But something flashed across Diane's face, just for a second. Fear. The next week felt like drowning in slow motion. Lawrence arranged for DNA testing through GeneTech Labs, a certified facility in Cambridge. Dr. Rachel Morrison, forensic DNA specialist, 23 years of experience, would oversee the process. "We'll need samples from both of you," Dr. Morrison explained in her office. "Clinical white walls, microscopes, refrigeration units humming, cheek swabs, simple procedure. We'll compare your DNA to William Carmichael's medical records. Results take 5 to 7 days." Preston went first, confident, smiling, like he was getting a teeth cleaning. I went second. My hands shook as Dr. Morrison swabbed the inside of my cheek. "Nervous?" she asked. "Wouldn't you be? Results don't lie. Whatever the truth is, you'll have clarity. Like that would fix 18 years of being told I didn't belong." I stayed at the Courtyard Marriott near Wellesley. Couldn't afford anything nicer. Couldn't stomach staying at the house. Preston texted me the next day. Dad's funeral is Thursday, 11 a.m., St. Paul's Church. Try to look respectable. I showed up in my only suit, navy blue from Macy's, bought for job interviews 3 years ago. The church was packed. 400 people, senators, CEOs, federal judges. An usher met me at the door. Name? Ethan Carmichael. He checked his clipboard. You're in section C, back row. Behind distant cousins I'd met twice. Behind Dad's business partners. Behind people who didn't even know him. The program listed family members in elegant calligraphy. Wife, Diane Carmichael. Son, Preston Carmichael. Other relatives, Ethan Carmichael. Not son, not family. Other. Preston gave the first eulogy. Talked about Dad's business empire, his philanthropy, his devotion to family. My father taught me everything. How to negotiate, how to lead, how to be a man. He choked up. Real tears. Or maybe Preston was just that good at performing. Diane gave the second eulogy. She wore black Prada, pearls, a hat with a veil. William was my rock, my partner, the love of my life. Our son Preston was his greatest pride. She never said my name, not once. After the service, I stood alone by the exit while everyone else gathered in the reception hall. Shrimp cocktails, champagne, laughter that felt obscene. Then the housekeeper found me. Rosa Martinez, 63 years old. She'd worked for Dad since before I was born. Mr. Ethan, she whispered, pressing something into my hand. Third floor study, the locked one. He wanted you to see it. What is it? The key and the truth. I waited until 1 a.m. Everyone had left. The house was dark except for security lights. I used the key Rosa gave me. The third floor study had been locked for as long as I could remember. Dad's private office, off limits. The door opened with a click. I turned on the lights. The walls were covered with photographs of me, professional surveillance photos. Me walking to work in Boston, me at a coffee shop, me at Morrison and Clark's office building, me outside my apartment carrying groceries, hundreds of them, going back years. Dad had been watching my entire adult life. On the desk, a folder, red labeled confidential. Inside, a DNA test, dated 12 years ago. Preston Carmichael, 0% biological relationship to William Carmichael. My hands went numb. There were medical records from 2013. Preston had needed a kidney transplant, genetic disorder. Dad had volunteered as a donor. The doctors told him he wasn't a match, not just incompatible, no genetic relationship at all. That's when he'd ordered the test. There were divorce papers, filed 5 years ago. William Carmichael v. Diane Shaw Carmichael, finalized September 2019. They'd been divorced for 5 years, and there was a letter, Dad's handwriting, shaky, written recently. Ethan, I failed you. When your mother died, I was broken. Diane appeared 6 months later, beautiful, charming, exactly what a grieving widower needed to hear. I married her too quickly, believed her too easily. Preston was born a year later. I loved him, raised him as my son. But when he needed that transplant in 2013, the doctors told me the truth. No biological match, not even close. I ordered the DNA test. The results destroyed me. Diane had an affair. Preston wasn't mine, but I'd raised him for 14 years. He called me Dad. How could I tell him his entire life was a lie? Then I had the stroke. 3 months after discovering the truth. The doctors said it was stress-induced. Diane took over everything. Power of attorney, medical decisions. She isolated me, controlled who visited, screened my calls. I tried to reach you, called your number dozens of times. Every call blocked, every message deleted. Diane made sure. I divorced her legally 5 years ago, but she never left the house. Said it would traumatize Preston. I was too weak to fight. So I watched you from the shadows, hired investigators, got photos, lived through your successes from a distance. You became everything I hoped you'd be. Honest, hardworking, good. This will is my last chance to make things right, to give you what you deserve, to expose the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I let them push you out. I'm sorry for everything. I love you, son. The letter ended mid-sentence. He died before finishing it. I sat in that study for 3 hours, reading the documents, staring at the photographs, trying to understand. Dad had known. For 12 years he'd known Preston wasn't his son, and he'd still let me walk out, still let me believe I was the outsider. But the stroke, the power of attorney, Diane controlling everything. He'd been trapped. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate. Preston appeared in the doorway. He looked at the photographs on the walls, at the folder in my hands. His face went white. What is this? He whispered. The truth. He stepped inside, saw the DNA test on the desk, picked it up with shaking hands, read it. His legs buckled. He sat heavily in Dad's leather chair. This is fake, he said. It has to be fake. It's from 2013, when you needed the kidney transplant. Dad volunteered as a donor. They told him he wasn't a match. Preston's face crumbled. He never said anything, because he loved you anyway, because you called him Dad, because telling you the truth would have destroyed you. Then why are you showing me this now? Because you demanded a DNA test, because you stood in front of 32 people and called my legitimacy legitimacy into question, because you've spent your entire life making me feel like I didn't belong. I stood. The DNA results come back Friday. When Lawrence reads them, everyone's going to know. Preston looked up at me, not with anger, with something worse. Horror. The look of someone whose entire identity was shattering. Does Mom know? He whispered. Read the divorce papers. She's the reason the test exists. The will reading was scheduled for Friday morning, December 1st, 10 a.m. Lawrence Rothstein's office in downtown Boston. Corner suite, 14th floor, windows overlooking the common. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, law books lining the walls. Diane sat center stage wearing a black St. John's suit. Pearls, hair styled perfectly, but her hands were clenched tight in her lap. Preston sat beside her, but his chair was pulled 6 inches away. He hadn't spoken to her since finding the study. I sat across from them. 3 other relatives filled the remaining seats. Second cousins who barely knew Dad, but were named in the will for token amounts. Lawrence opened his briefcase. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Before we proceed with the reading of William Carmichael's will, there's a matter to address. He pulled out a sealed envelope from Gene Tech Labs. The room went silent. Mr. Carmichael added a clause to his will 2 years before his death. The estate, valued at approximately $47 million, will be distributed solely to his biological children. All parties claiming inheritance were required to consent to DNA testing. Anyone who refused would forfeit their claim. Lawrence picked up a letter opener, sliced through the envelope. The results are as follows. My heart hammered against my ribs. Ethan Carmichael. Lawrence looked at me. Confirmed 99.999% biological match to William Carmichael. I exhaled slowly. Relief flooded through me. Diane let out a small breath too, still hoping. Lawrence continued. Preston Carmichael. He paused. The silence stretched. 0 biological relationship to William Carmichael detected. Preston shot to his feet. That's impossible. There's been a mistake. He spun toward Diane. Mom, tell them they're wrong. Tell them this is some kind of error. But Diane just sat there, frozen, color draining from her face. This is a setup, she shouted. Lawrence tampered with the results. This is fraud. I pulled out the 12-year-old DNA test from the folder, slid it across the desk. Then explain this, I said quietly. Dad already knew. He found out in 2013 when Preston needed a kidney transplant, and he volunteered as a donor. The doctors at Mass General told him there was no genetic match. That's when he ordered this test. I looked at Diane. 12 years. He knew for 12 years. He loved Preston anyway. Diane's voice cracked. He raised him. He called him his son. Mrs. Lawrence paused. Or should I say Ms. Shaw? Since your divorce from William Carmichael was finalized 5 years ago, you have no legal standing in this proceeding. Diane's face went from pale to gray. Preston stared at his mother. You were divorced? Preston, sweetie, it was just paperwork. It didn't mean you lied to me. His voice was barely a whisper. About everything. I was protecting you. Diane reached for his hand. He jerked away. Protecting me? Preston's voice rose. You spent my whole life telling me Ethan was probably illegitimate. You made me treat him like garbage. You convinced me I was the real son and he was the fake. He turned to me. His eyes were wet. And the whole time, it was me. Lawrence cleared his throat. There's more. Mr. Carmichael left a final letter. He wanted it read aloud in this setting. He pulled out a document, began reading Dad's words. The affair, the deception, the discovery during the transplant, the stroke, the power of attorney, Diane blocking access, the surveillance photos, the divorce, the will as Dad's final act to expose the truth and protect me. When Lawrence finished, the room was silent. One of the cousins stood and left without a word. The other 2 followed. It was just us. Me, Preston, Diane, and Lawrence. Preston sat with his head in his hands. I don't know who I am anymore. You're Preston Shaw, I said quietly. That's who you've always been. But Dad raised you, loved you, even after he knew. That part was real. Then why did he leave me out of the will? Because Diane used you as a weapon. Because she poisoned you against me. Because he wanted the truth to come out, and money was the only way to force it. Preston looked at Diane. Who's my real father? She didn't answer. Who is he? Marcus Bennett, she whispered. A colleague at the firm. It was a mistake. A one-time thing. Does he know? Silence. Does he know I exist? I told him I miscarried. Preston made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. So I'm nobody's son. William's not my father. Marcus doesn't know I exist. And you? He looked at her with something close to hatred. You built my entire life on a lie. Lawrence folded his hands. The will is clear. The estate passes entirely to Ethan Carmichael. Preston Shaw receives nothing. Diane Shaw receives nothing. He looked at me. Mr. Carmichael, do you have any questions? Just one. What about the house? It's yours, along with all properties, investments, and assets. Total value, $47.3 million. Preston didn't fight it, didn't hire lawyers, didn't contest the will. He just left, moved out of the estate 3 days later with 2 suitcases and his car. Diane tried to follow him. He told her if she ever contacted him again, he'd get a restraining order. I heard through Rosa that he moved to Portland, changed his name legally to Preston Shaw, started over. Diane moved to Florida, lives in a condo in Boca Raton. We've never spoken since that day in Lawrence's office. I'm sitting in Dad's study now, the third-floor room with the photographs still on the walls. I had them framed. A reminder that even when I thought I was alone, someone was watching. Someone cared. The estate is being turned into a nonprofit. The Carmichael Foundation for Children Without Parents, scholarships, housing assistance, therapy programs. I kept the house, but I don't live here. Too many ghosts. I visit on weekends, sit in this study, read Dad's unfinished letter. I love you, son. I always what? Always knew, always believed, always hoped? I'll never know. But I know this. DNA doesn't make you family. Sacrifice does. Love does. Being there does. Preston spent 31 years being told he was William Carmichael's son, believing it, building his identity around it. I spent 18 years being told I wasn't. When the truth came out, we both lost something, but I gained something too. Proof that the man who raised me knew exactly who I was, believed in me even from a distance, left me everything not because of blood, but because of choice. Last week, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside, one sentence. Thank you for not destroying me worse than I destroyed myself. P. I folded it, put it in the desk drawer next to Dad's unfinished letter. Maybe someday I'll respond. But today, I'm just sitting here, looking at photographs of a man who loved me enough to fight for me in the only way he could, through the truth. Justice doesn't belong to blood. It belongs to the people who stay.